Good to have you here with us today. I'm Hal Core. I'm a member of Grace Lutheran Church, and I was one of seven lucky people who met with Pastor Laura this past spring. And we took a class on a Wednesday night called Say What? How to Write a Sermon. And it was all about, over the next, the ensuing 5 weeks, 6 weeks, on what are the elements that comprise a sermon. Sermons in general, but also what makes a sermon particularly Lutheran, from the Lutheran perspective, as we are the Lutheran Church. And so that's why I'm here today. The culmination of this class was that we were to do a sermon based on the readings we selected on that first day of class. So obviously the readings I selected were today's readings. And we had about, on and all, 20 minutes or 30 minutes to pick these readings. So as you can tell, we had a lot of time to think about this, right? No, we just had a stack of readings, and we read through them. And pretty quickly I had to formulate, well, this one's for me. And I chose these readings. What struck me, just a quick glance through, was the idea of power. The concept of power really fascinates me. Maybe it's my background as an actor. I've got the idea of what is the nature of power? What can a power accomplish? Who has the power? Who wants the power? Who needs the power? How is power transferred from one to another? It's a fluid, dynamic thing, and that kind of fascinated me. And as I began to delve into these readings, what I realized, well, I've got a confession. I've got to kind of take a step back and confess that, I could say this fully. I know myself well enough. I'm very comfortable with who I am. And I stand before you and confess that I'm a 44-year-old geek. I'm a comic book fan, a comic book fanatic. I love all the superhero stories. And one of the things that fascinates me, I think, as far as, as well as so many fans, is not just the doing acts of good, but also how do they come to do these acts of good? How did they get these powers? Superheroes have what they call an origin story. It's the story of how a mere mortal becomes Superman, or Batman, or Wonder Woman, or Batgirl. All this, how did this come to be? And I realized that each of these three readings deals with an origin story. We start with Ezekiel in the Old Testament reading. He was sort of like the instant superhero. God said, "Stand up, mortal, I have a job for you to do." And began to talk to Ezekiel, and through the talking, Ezekiel received the power and the instructions to go forth and tell this rebellious nation of Israel that they're not right in the ways of the Lord. So off he goes. He's sort of our Superman. Of course, he had a super huge hard task to do, so I think he got an extra blessing from God for that one. And then the second reading, the epistle, is Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. Paul, to me, is sort of like Batman. He's the darker, edgier superhero. He's shrouded in mystery. Some superheroes like Batman don't want their origin stories told because their origin story is the source of their power, that mystery surrounding it. Who is this masked person? And Paul is like that when he references this mysterious thorn in his side that's been a source of weakness and trouble for him for years until God clarifies things and says, hey, use that weakness, make it your source of strength, make it your power, and go forth and do amazing things. So Paul does that. It seems to work for him. And then we come into the gospel reading of Mark, chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. And I'll spend most of the time talking about this reading. It's somewhat of the apostles' origin story. It's also something of a turning point in Jesus' ministry as well. I would cut the gospel reading into two parts. The first part I would subtitle Jesus Bombs in Nazareth. Because let's face it, that's what happened. It's right there in the good book. I'm not lying when I make this up. Those people were astounded. And astounded doesn't have the meaning today that it did back then. I went and researched the root of the word. It means basically to be stoned. Like with rocks. That doesn't sound like someone who's impressed. Having rocks thrown against her head. I think maybe a more modern translation would be freaked out. I think the people of Nazareth was freaked out by what Jesus was saying, what he was doing. Can you imagine them going home and saying, do you know what that guy Jesus did? Yeah, we went to school with him. he made my Aunt Maisie stand up and walk, and she's been crippled for 14 years. That is just weird. We are not inviting him to the next house party. We don't want any of that kind of weirdness around us. Remember, Nazareth was a little small town. Jesus didn't come from the big city. So they had different ways of thinking. They really did. And as far as Jesus was amazed at their unbelief. Now, who saw the Amazing Spider-Man open this weekend? Not, well, you need to go see it. It's amazing, in fact. I was amazed. People in the audience were amazed. Well, I'll tell you what, when Jesus was amazed at the people of Nazareth's unbelief, it doesn't mean the same thing as it does today. What it really means is to literally be in a maze, which is to be lost, to not know which direction to turn, to be confused and confounded, and to be speechless because you don't know what to say or to do next. That doesn't sound like our divine Jesus, right? Jesus is my ultimate superhero. But this day in Nazareth, Jesus was not so super, was he? He was fully human. And it's a very important, potent reminder of just how human Jesus was. Isn't that a bit of good news in our lives? Jesus can relate to us. If any of you have ever sent out a resume for a job, or opened up your heart to the person you love and shared your affections, only to have that person not return the affection back to you, you've known rejection of friends or families for various reasons. Well, on this day in Nazareth, Jesus experienced rejection. So he knows what we go through in our lives. He's been there. But just like any good superhero, he picks himself up. Superheroes aren't always, successful. They get trounced by the villain, and they have to go away and come back and fight another day. And that's just what Jesus does. We go into the second part of the gospel that I entitle Bon Voyage, Pack Light. Because that's basically what Jesus tells the apostles, right? Just like any superhero, Jesus from time to time throughout the Bible will go and remove himself from the people. He'll separate himself from his apostles, and he'll go off by himself to pray, to reflect, to regroup. And I believe that's what Jesus does in this instance. The gospel writer, Mark, doesn't really give us any details, just goes from one event to the other. But I pretty much bet Jesus went and retooled his plan. Can you imagine some of the dialogue between Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit? How can I expect my followers to go out and do what I do and succeed when I can't even succeed in my own hometown? How can I expect that of these people? So, armed with this discussion with Jesus, with God, Jesus goes and gathers his apostles and says, go out 2 by 2. Basically do what I've been doing, but go out in pairs, because there's strength in numbers. And can you imagine the look on the apostles' faces when Jesus gave them this information, these instructions? Imagine it's Monday morning, they gather in the office, and Jesus says, okay, I got an idea for a great marketing scheme. So he lays it all out, and the apostles are like, what? We're going to do what? With who? I don't even think I like Simon enough to go out in the village with him and preach. I can't take what? I can take my lip balm? I need my lip balm. Jesus has none of that. Jesus says, you don't need to take anything. You don't need anything for this journey. Why do you suppose he said that? Because like any good superhero, you've got powers, and you've got gifts, and you've got gadgets. Well, Jesus wasn't so much with the gadgets, but he was with the powers, and he knew that the apostles were ready and could take on this task. He had equipped them, you see, with all the experiences that these apostles have had following Jesus previously to the villages, and all the stories they collected in their hearts, and all the wonderful, amazing, modern-day, amazing things that Jesus had done to change people's lives and transform them to lead a life that's Christ-like. And so they were equipped for the journey. There's a great little line or little scene in The Amazing Spider-Man, the movie, where Peter Parker confesses to his girlfriend, Gwen Stacy, that he's Spider-Man. And they're talking about it, and Gwen Stacy just asks, aren't you scared? And Peter Parker looks at her and says, no, because he had been equipped with the powers to do the job. And similarly,